it's good to stay alive, right? You don't want to die. So in the case of Colorado, you can fart and start a forest fire.
No, you'll be fine. Hang on, let me just adjust the gain. It's
do we need any sort of screen or block for this glare?
For real.
Makeup.
Dude,
You going, Brent?
I think you got to be around those things. First of all, they're so big.
Yeah.
Like it's a horse with a tree growing out of its head, and it's screaming like an animal from the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even seem real.
And it's loud enough?
Oh, I wasn't. It actually just kicked into both ears.
Okay, you do hear it now.
I didn't. I don't now. I did.
So which is it, dude?
You hear it now.
You're confusing me. No, I'm only hearing out of one.
Why, yes, Brian. It is true.
That sounds terrible.
The days of our lives.
Hello, all right. You're listening to the Gritty Bowman, home of gritty bow hunting films, interviews, tall tales, and a wee bit of manly boasting.
I'm South Cox, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Hey, this is Corey Jacobsen, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowman.
We born and raised outdoors, and you've been listening to The Gritty Bowman.
There you go.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Jordan.
And you're watching
The Gritty Bowman.
On this episode of Gritty Bowman, I traveled to Boise, Idaho to visit with friend Corey Jacobsen, multiple-time world elk calling champion and owner of elk101.com. On this episode, Corey and I talk more about hashtag Project Success, an exciting Elk 101 initiative underway. We get into solo hunting and solo calling for elk, and this topic leads us to more discussions about the controversial face-on frontal shot, and Corey drops some bona fide measurements regarding the frontal shot opening. We talk about the moon phase and its effect on elk hunting, and we discuss some of the current threats to our public lands, and we get into scent control and cover scent products for elk hunting. It's all gritty stuff. Okay, you ready?
Ready.
Roger, Duck Dodger. All right, folks, welcome back to the Gritty Bowman podcast. I'm here in Boise, Idaho with Corey Jacobsen. We were here for an Elk 101 project, and I'm in your home, and you've got this gigantic bull behind you. This thing is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Like, I've seen it in pictures. The thirds on that thing are as long as the main beams on my bulls. I mean, I've never seen thirds like that on any bull. I don't know if I've ever seen them.
A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, and we stumbled into a good one.
The whale tail on that at the very end. That's a back scratcher. I mean,
you know, the thirds on that bull really stand out, and that's what you notice, and it kind of takes away from the fact it has 60-inch main beams.
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible from the side, too.
I was back there, like, just trying to measure that. I'm like, that back scratcher it's way back there. It's just cool. We've been looking at it since we got here. Just every time you leave the room, you know, Jeff and Mark Skousen, we were all, man, jeez, you know.
Yeah, we had 6 of you packed in here in this tiny little room in my basement.
It's like a castle. I don't know what you're talking about. Lush accommodations.
We had to turn the elk to be able to fit everyone in the room.
What does that one score?
It was right at 390.
Man, that is a monster.
It's a bull of a lifetime.
Yeah. Really is. That's special. Anyway, we're gonna power through some of these questions.
Yeah.
We did a podcast earlier today. We're going to go through and try to hammer out a few more. What are some of the other questions we kind of touched on a little bit on the last one?
Continuing on with that project success and the number one elk hunting question that followers of Elk 101 have, and you know, the first thing, the most common asked question in that was one we covered last time, and that was digital scouting. How do I scout from afar? The next most oft asked question was, how do I call in an elk by myself? Solo hunting strategies. You know, I understand the caller shooter scenario. Yeah, I get that it works, but either I don't have any friends, or you know, I don't like other people, or I like to make things hard for myself. You know, whatever it is, there. I'll tell you this: if you have an opportunity to hunt with a partner, it's going to increase your success if you have a good partner and you hunt, similar styles and that. But it's not always possible, and there's just something to be said about going out and hunting by yourself once in a while. So
Anthony was really excited to solo hunt this year. Went after it, killed a bull solo, sort of. Half killed it, and we killed it the next day to sort of together. No, it was a solo hunt, and he always has wanted to do that. And he's done it before, but just really dedicate a serious chunk of his season to doing it by himself.
Yep.
Backpacked in by himself, got on the bull and shot it himself. I don't have that passion. I don't mind going out and doing it by myself. And after seeing him do it and watching all those episodes with Tim Burnett and Remy Warren on Solo Hunter, I absolutely there's a part of me that likes that. But if I have limited time off, I want to go with buddies.
Maximize efficiency, and that's where the 2-person calling setup.
If things are so that I have 3-4 weeks to go and I only have a buddy who can go for one, then I'd be solo hunting a lot more than I have so far in my life.
Totally. So, I think at the end of the day, the strategy is to get that bull into your setup so you have a shot. If you're the shooter, the caller's job is to pull that bull into your setup. And if you don't have a caller back behind, you have to play both roles. So you have to pull that bull into your own setup. And that's, it's tough because we hear all the time, the elk came to 80 yards and hung up. Well, at 80 yards, typically they can see where you're calling from. They're going to circle around and get downwind of you. So it's that magical 80-yard window that you've got to navigate alone without having somebody back behind you. So, there's a lot of things. I think strategy-wise, it doesn't really change. It's just you have to either project yourself to be back behind where you actually are so that bull will come in a little farther into your setup, or you have to call and then move forward so that you're getting a little closer to the bull. And ultimately, that's the key. It's not like there's a whole change in tactics to go from aggressive to timid or to try some magical solo formula, because if it works for one person, it's going to work for two. If it works for two, it's not the same as not going to work for one necessarily.
Do you think it's you have a better odds when you're solo to call an elk in, or better odds to just sneak in? Abandon calling altogether.
Totally. No, and I think you definitely. I don't know that I'd put you have better odds one way or another. If you are a spot and stalk hunter, I think you would probably be better off hunting alone. 2 people there is just more noise, more scent. If you just absolutely don't use elk calls, there's no reason to have another person there with you until you kill it, and then they can help you pack it out. But as far as getting it killed, there is no benefit to having 2 people there if you're hunting spot and stalk alone.
Yeah, like my cousin Ben, who Anthony and I were just the third wheel calling elk in for him, and then he just go rogue,
takes off
over and over.
Yeah, so I guess if you're spot and stalk and you don't call elk, and that's your style, being a solo hunter is not a bad thing. If you're calling elk, though, it definitely adds an element of difficulty to do it alone. We highlighted that this year on a hunt we went on. I had a camera guy with me. I was by myself. We had a bull that we spent 30 minutes just literally doing a half moon around, keeping the wind in our favor, trying to get in a lane, trying to get in close. He had 2 cows. He was a younger bull, and he wouldn't come into our calls. I mean, I could not break him free into our setup. I tried raking, I tried cutting him off, I did everything, and it was keeping his attention. He was talking, but he would not come in for 30 minutes. So I left the camera guy set up in the lane and said, just sit right here. I'm going back 40 yards just to prove a point here.
Yeah.
I moved back 40 yards, started raking a tree, let out one bugle, and the bull came walking into that setup, which just illustrated to me, had there been a shooter and a caller, a 2-person setup there, that caller just being 40 yards back would have pulled that bull right into the lane with the shooter.
Yeah.
And so you've got to navigate that alone. And, for me doing that, had I ran back, raked a tree, bugled, I would have either had to sprint back up there and not get caught moving, or make it sound like I was making those noises from 40 yards behind.
I heard Jim Horn talk about doing that, and some other guys where they go back and they bugle and make all this noise and they run forward 50 yards to try to be there when that bull comes into the area where he's going to hang up.
Yeah.
Just all that movement is awful risky, and they can hear so well, and their senses are so finely tuned that usually they still can figure out that you're right there somewhere close by. And he may not think you're a hunter. I think most of the time he probably assumes you're actually an elk.
But he knows right where you are.
He knows right where you are anyway. And so he's going to just double check.
And then he's going to come in looking, say, okay, I heard noise, I heard footprints, whatever it was, heard steps there. I'm looking for that elk. And so he gets to a certain point, 60 yards, 80 yards away. He can see that point. He doesn't see an elk. He's not coming closer. He's nervous. And
my take is, this is how I tend to do it. Anthony, I think, is similar. We will try to get as close as we can if we're by ourselves. All the times I've been alone hunting, I'm getting in as close as I can, trying to get without relying on calling at all if I'm by myself. Because too many times, especially in a lot of the heavily hunted areas that we're in, calling like that solo, it just says, here, this is where I'm at, and then just tells that bull exactly where he needs to go to just pinpoint us.
Yep.
And after doing that and blowing opportunities so many times, we're like, the calls are out the window. And so I tend to sneak in as close as I can to get, and try to do it without, and I might use a call just to get him to
respond, so you know where he's at,
or for him to move his body a little bit. But I never bugle. I always just kind of do a little cow call, like, there's a little calf over here, and they seem to like just. I've called where I'm 60 yards from a bull. Just call, cow call, and he didn't even lift his head up. He just keeps eating. It's just he just hears cow calls all the time. It wasn't alarming. And then I've done it where he lifts his head up and just curious and just kind of walks a little closer. So I've had that experience with cow calls. Now when I bugle, what I've experienced when I'm in that range is that kind of makes them a lot often. It rarely brings them in for me. It makes them circle and start checking and stuff. So that's just been my limited experience going solo. I think that for me, I kind of have this rule. If it's a raghorn, spike, something like that, a young bull, then yeah, I can call, bugle, solo. I can get pretty loose with the calling, and they're so dumb and young that I can coax them in, and they don't pay attention. And if I get them excited enough, I do like an estrus cow call or something like that. I've had young bulls do stupid things. They're not that hard to trick.
Sure.
But if we're talking, and so I'll use calls solo if I'm just trying to put meat in the freezer.
Yep.
But if I'm in any unit, and I'm really trying to get a mature bull, it's the first few days of my season, then yeah, I kind of abandon the calls and I just go in and try to be a ninja. And the only reason I would even use a call is just to get him to stop in the right position while, just before I shoot.
For sure. And I guess I'm either more ignorant or more stubborn, but I can't put calls away. I mean, it's just I will wear out a call trying to get that bull to come in. And I guess for me, I want that bull coming in fighting. So I rely on the bugle. I'll use a cow call to get him to talk. And as soon as he talks, I'm cutting him off, whether it's a big bull or a little bull. And I think the key to that is, number one, being in close, which we've talked a lot about. But I think more important, well, not maybe more importantly, but just as important is the setup. If you're by yourself and there's a 80-yard meadow and the bull's on the other side of it, you're not going to call that bull to your side of the meadow. He's going to stop on the other side because he can see your side.
Yep.
He doesn't see an elk and he's not coming closer. So your setup has to be in a place that bull has to come close enough to you to get a shot before he can see where you're actually physically see where you're calling from.
Yeah.
So setup's the key, getting in that place where he's got to come into you to get a visual.
And like you said, it kind of depends on the experience you're after too.
Totally.
Like you're like, I want to have him call. I want to call him in and have him come in and shoot him. And there's a big part of me, and I know Anthony Benner the same, where we want to sneak up on him like a cat, and put an arrow in him. After a long, hour-long barefoot stalk, So there's a certain feel or excitement that comes from that kind of approach for me, in a way that calling is different. It's still exciting. But in the heat of the rut with a group, with a team, I'll use calling as often as I can.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done it where I've had a buddy stay back 300 yards and just keep the bull talking in his bed, just every 15 minutes so I know he's still there. And then I slip in, and I mean, a 3-hour stalk, to get in there and shoot him at 18 yards while he's in his bed. And so, yeah, like you say, I'm certainly not saying use calls every time it's the only way. I don't think there's a more exciting way than having a big mature bull come in screaming in your face wanting to fight. But yeah, if you're trying, if it's all about efficiency, there are certain situations where you just have to read that and say, you know what, this bull is going to be tough for me to call in alone, put the calls away and just try to stalk in there.
And that's a good point. You really do need to weigh out the situation, because we've been in some places where it's so thick you can't take another step without breaking a branch or busting a tree. Well, that's actually a perfect position to call a bull in.
Right.
It's so thick.
He's got to come all the way there.
He's got to come in to see, and he's not going, well, I should see elk by now, because he can't.
Right.
And so you're calling them through, and we did that a few years back. We were in Mount Emily in Oregon, and Anthony and we were standing like from here, like 6 feet apart. Anthony was doing the calling. I got my bow. I mean, I could have been the solo. We were so close, right? And we're just sitting there, and it just got so thick, we got trapped. And the bull was in there making noise and raking. We're like, you know what? I think we can call him right to the collar. And sure enough, it was just so thick that those sounds, he just had to come in all the way to be able to get on that. And he just wasn't the bull I was looking for in that unit. But
and I think beyond that, if you're calling alone, if you wait until the bull gets to 60 or 80 yards and then you're trying to call, he's going to be able to pinpoint you a lot more.
Yep.
So as he's coming in, he's coming in from 120, 150 yards, you've got to broadcast that sound out behind you and make him think you're another 40 yards. I shot an elk in Oregon 2 years ago. Last day, Donnie texted me on the phone. He's like, I can't even hear your bugles anymore. I'm heading back to camp.
Yeah.
And so I'm by myself last afternoon and got a bull to answer down in the hole at about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was coming running. We didn't have very many. In 8 days, we didn't have very many elk that came running. This one did. And when he got to about 120 yards, I just turned my head, cow called through my bugle tube and made it sound like it was 30 or 40 yards up the hill. And he came right by me heading up to that point where I'd broadcasted the cow call to and had no idea I was there at 18 yards. And so it was almost like having a two-person setup.
Do you think that works, though? Like, I think probably you're right. From the distances where he was at, it was hard to pinpoint you exactly. And you can throw your voice a little bit. But I think often they know exactly where that sound came from, even when you're broadcasting it the wrong direction. I think
if you're broadcasting it directly behind you, they're going to come in on that same line. Mm-hmm. But if you go at an angle it, say, 60 degrees away from you, through a bugle tube and cow call, I definitely think there's a directional throw there that he's looking up the hill. Because, his eyes were fixed exactly where I'd pointed the bugle up into the thick brush up there. So,
True.
I did it hoping that, hey, if he gets to a certain point, there's some big trees
through
there.
A tube, it does kind of throw it that direction. Versus if you're just doing a cow call without directing it, you just turn around and do it. It still maybe it just sounds local.
Yeah.
Whereas through the tube, it kind of throws it out.
Yeah, definitely.
I can see that. One of those people that I had never really. We do that a lot in order to make it sound like there's more elk or there's elk here or there. We kind of turn around and call in different directions and stuff. But one of the things that one of the solo hunters that I've heard talk that has killed a lot of elk is Dan Evans.
Right.
And I've heard him talk about how he does it. And one of the things that I think solo elk hunters need to be proficient at is the controversial front shot, the face-on shot.
Yeah.
That is a shot that often when you're calling solo, that bull is going to present a head-on shot.
Totally.
So if he comes into 20 yards and he's head-on and you're not going to take a front shot, you got to catch them when they turn sideways and try to call or stop them, or you're waiting for that shot. If you're confident and capable of taking that front shot, you're going to have better success. And so it was interesting. I had it comes up every time. There's some people that are very, very much against the front shot.
Totally.
Remy Warren was on a Meat Eater show not too long ago, just a bonus extra, like web exclusive kind of footage on the YouTube channel. And he talks about how the front shot is just, the face-on shot is just not a good shot to take. It's just such a low percentage shot. And there are other shots that are better and you should take. And I think, at a high level, in a blanket statement, broadcasting among most hunters, that's probably not the worst advice.
Sure.
But I think there's for me, that face-on shot has a lot of value, a lot of guys. So Dan Evans is a perfect example. You know, there were some gentlemen on some forums that were saying, Dan, that's not an ethical shot.
Right.
And Dan had said something, and I think it was, he's like, look, I'm 17 for 17 bulls through the front shot.
And the people that have bad experiences with the front shot, we've talked in several podcasts about the frontal shot, but and where this is coming from, I went and spent a day at the butcher here about a month ago. I dissected an elk. I absolutely had a full carcass there, took it apart level of muscle by level of muscle, so there was nothing left but the skeletal frame sitting there, and I have pictures, measurements, everything, showing that thoracic opening on the front of it there. It's not the size of a tennis ball. It just truly, factually is not the size of a tennis ball. And I also measured where the diaphragm comes down in the ribs, up to the leg bone, where the shoulder blade comes across, on the top part of the rib cage, down to where the vitals sit in there.
That's awesome.
The kill zone on a broadside elk is not near as big as people. I've heard people say it's 24 by 24. It's not. 14 by 18 would be, average size on an average bull on a broadside shot. And on the frontal shot,
a foot by a foot and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be, moderately on an average bull. On the frontal shot, you've got, if you know what you're aiming at, it's not a matter of, it's a once in a million type of shot. You have to hit exactly in this one certain spot. You just have to know where the vitals are. You have to know where that opening is. You have to know what your arrow can do. And if you're able to put it in there, literally on a straight on frontal shot, you've got about 8 by 10 inches there to get an arrow in. If you hit an inch too low, a lot of people aim at that lump on the front of the bull there, which is actually the sternum where all the ribs come together. If you hit that, you're not going to get into the opening.
No.
If you hit below that, you're not going to get into the opening. If that bull is angled just a little bit and you hit a couple inches off to the right or the left, it's going to slide between the rib cage and the shoulder blade, and that's where people are having bad experiences. I shot one there and saw the full arrow penetrate, and it didn't kill it. If that arrow is going into the thoracic opening, it will kill that elk quickly. There is, that's not an argument that can be made.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that shot, and something that I've thought about recently, is like I think Dan said the opening, like you just said, it was like 8 by what?
8 by 10-ish, and that's, I was pretty conservative there. There's more area you could still hit and kill that elk.
So at 20 yards, 8 by 10s, especially when you look at the kill zone on a broadside blacktail buck, it's no bigger than that.
Not a whole lot different.
It's not a whole lot different. And there are a lot of us that will take a 50-yard shot
at
like
a
that.
mule deer or a whitetail, and be just totally fine at 50 yards, but won't take a 20-yard frontal
on an elk that has the same size target.
Yep. And honestly, I'm not sitting here justifying me taking the shot or Dan Evans taking the shot, and I'm not saying everyone needs to take that shot. It comes down to personal confidence in that shot. And like Dan said, he's 17 for 17. I lost an elk on a frontal shot several years ago, and it was my fault. I hit off to the side. It went between the rib cage and the shoulder blade. That elk was bugling an hour later. It wasn't...
That was the other thing I was going to bring up, though, is if you think about it ethically, which shot has a best chance for survival on the animal?
It's either dead or it's a
non-lethal shot.
Non-lethal shot.
That's a pretty dang good argument for taking that shot opposed to a quartering away shot or even a broadside.
Broadside.
Because if you think about that, and I read a few books on tracking, and one of the better books I've read is Tracking with Dogs.
Right.
And in that book, the gentleman who wrote it had tracked something like 400 wounded deer in his career. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And X amount were recovered, like more than half. And he talks about how he goes through the process. And what he was saying was basically from the chest cavity forward, if a deer or an elk gets hit there, an animal gets hit there, it's largely a hemorrhage. It's a wound that causes lots of bleeding.
Right.
And either the animal dies from it or it survives.
Yep.
There's very little infection that'll incur. If they can stop the bleeding, then generally they're really tough, their immune systems are strong, they're going to bounce back from that, often be normal in a week or so. If you shoot an animal and it hits guts at all, it's a death sentence.
Yeah.
It
might take 3 days.
It might take 3 months.
Yeah.
But it's a death sentence.
Yeah.
When you hit he talked about it. He's like, it's not a matter of when they die. It's not a matter of if. It's just when. When you hit anywhere in those guts and you open up all the stuff from the stomach and everything, all of that leaks out.
It just becomes septic, and it kills the animal.
And they get infections. They can't fight it. Gut shots are fatal.
Yep.
It's just a matter of when.
Totally.
They can't beat that infection. And so when you're dealing with that shot, you think about it. You take that front shot and you miss, and you hit the shoulder. You hit between the shoulder and the rib cage or whatever. Those are tough animals. We talked about it in an earlier podcast. They're stabbing each other with these 6-inch horns and bouncing back pretty quickly.
But it's a muscle wound. I mean, it's a
muscle
healable wound.
And you don't want to wound an animal. You don't. I mean, that's not but the point is, when you take that shot and you do wound one, doesn't kill them. And often they bounce back fine.
Yep.
And so...
And that's not justification to say, take the frontal shot, because if you mess it up, it's going to be okay.
It's got to make you think twice, though, because if you're taking a risk at taking that quarter and away shot and you're feeding it up through the guts to hit the lungs,
that elk's going to die. You just might not find it.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's something that you got to think about. It's like, well, if I miss on the front, I didn't sentence him to death.
Yep.
I just hurt him. If I take that other shot and I never find him and I don't kill him, I've killed him. It's just not now.
And I think it's really important at this point to point out that doesn't give you a green light to just start flinging arrows at the frontal shot, because, well, if I don't hit the hole, he's not going to die. Yeah. So it's a matter of saying, this is another viable place to put an arrow. And if you know the opening, and we're going to have the full diagram of this elk with measurements, pictures of the thoracic opening overlaid onto an actual elk, so you can see, what physical characteristics on the outside of the elk translate to
the internal
aiming points you need to hit. Circulatory diagrams, all of that we'll have on Elk 101 here in the near future. It's just for education. If somebody wants to learn where to shoot and they're interested in shooting the frontal shot, we'll have that information so they can learn. It's not saying everyone go out and start shooting frontal. It's just it's a matter of education and then a matter of confidence, which is all aspects of hunting.
Again, it goes back to it's just another tool in the toolkit. You can use it or not use it. But when we talk solo hunting for elk, especially when we're talking calling solo,
you've got to be prepared that elk's coming straight
That is a shot that will be presented to you often. So it's something to consider.
Absolutely. No. Another question. There were a lot of questions about wind and scent and thermals, and that's a whole podcast and a half just talking about that. But one of the questions was, if I douse myself in elk urine, like just drench myself in elk urine, can I walk right up to the elk with the wind blowing to him? And my answer to that is no. I guess there's a certain saturation point where, yes, you might actually get away with that. But scent lock, clothing, different sprays, cover scents, neutralizers, all of that will buy you an advantage, but it will not make you scent free. It will make your scent cone a little bit narrower maybe. Mm-hmm. It might get that bull another 10 yards into your shooting lane before he wins you. But ultimately, if he can smell a cover scent, he can smell the rest of you too, because you're still putting off an odor. And if he can smell that cover scent, he can smell you, and he recognizes, yes, I smell a cow in heat, but I also smell a stinky human, and that means danger.
And that said, sometimes I think with cover scents and stuff, or attractants, when a bull's like really amped up, he's horny, he's amped up, he's fired up, and he smells human mixed in with this very tempting female, he might
forget about his senses for a second.
Yeah, forget it, this is frustrating. I smell the danger, but this is alluring, and perhaps you can, like you said, you can buy a little time or a little bit, but you got to realize that their nose blows us away.
Oh,
it's phenomenal, and they make a living out of staying alive.
That's how they stay alive.
Picking out those particles, the smells, So basically, all you do is smell like human and elk urine.
Yep.
Like you were talking about, saturating as much as you can. In my mind, to me, you're still going to smell like a human. He's still going to pick you out of that elk smell.
Yep, and recognize danger because of it.
I think that sometimes, I don't even bother calling upwind of a bull
with the wind blowing from you to the bull.
Yes, I don't bother with that because that's not going to upwind of a bull.
You're just setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, he's going to smell me.
Yep.
Period. And if he doesn't smell me right away, he's going to eventually smell me. So I don't use that. Even with blacktail scents are. It's funny. I put them on my boots, when I walked in. Put it a tarsal gland, and I've seen deer hit that, follow it 100 yards exactly where I walked.
Totally.
But I'm wearing rubber boots. I've descented. I've done all these things to like control that. When I'm out elk hunting, I don't have that kind of control.
Right.
And I'm not really. So using scents to attract game, I think, is different than using scents to. As a cover.
Absolutely. And like if I'm sitting, say, a bear bait or something, the bait is a scent that attracts the animal. I'm going to spray myself with scent neutralizer to sit in that tree stand because if that bear circles down below me, I want to minimize my scent cone again. So it does bring an advantage, but it doesn't make you disappear from the senses of an animal.
Yeah, and the thing is, for elk hunting, I'm like, I think you just have to, because there's so much hiking and covering the hills and all that. An hour into after your scent-free bath, you're sweating up a storm. It's not controlled, man.
Yep.
Even hiking in 100 yards or 500 yards into my tree stand when I'm blacktail hunting, I'm so careful. And I even change my clothes sometimes when I get up there. And, I've done all this stuff, and then I'm way up in a tree, right? And it's a different game, different ball game. When I'm out there with elk, though, I don't bother because too much. I don't want to be right, but I keep it to a minimum. But my strategy is 100% the wind.
Yeah, and we talked in the last podcast about that hunter up on the hill that is above the elk. The wind's coming down, you're down below it calling, and all of a sudden he starts bugling, walking down towards the bull, and the bull gets quiet and moves off. And that guy's an idiot. He doesn't understand the wind. That's the first thought. And but I was doing a seminar last week. And I stressed the importance of the wind. Like it's just every time I talk about elk hunting, I just pound that in that you've got to play the wind. You've got to pay attention to it continually. It's always changing. Every time you make a move, check the wind. And at the end of the seminar, I said, any questions? And the guy raised his hand and said, why would elk just go quiet? They were bugling all morning, and we were up above them, and they were bugling down in the bottom, and had them going right at daylight, and we started dropping down in there, and they just went quiet for no reason. I said, okay, what's the wind doing at daylight? And he's like, moving downhill. Mm-hmm. And I said, and you were above the elk? And he said, yeah. And I said, they were down in the draw below you? And he said, yeah. And he's like, they just went quiet for no reason. I said, okay, you just explained to me the wind's blowing to them. You were 400 yards away. There was a reason. He's like, oh, I didn't think about that. But what other reasons would they go quiet? And, it's just pay attention to the wind. I can't stress it enough. And so a follow-up question that we got was, what's the number one piece of advice you would give to a new elk hunter? And I think they can find anything they need to know on elk101.com, other places, that will get them in the ballpark, that will get them out hunting. If I had to stress something that I tattooed on the back of their hands every time they lifted their bugle tube up, they saw it. It was obey the wind. Just always pay attention to the wind. And that's the wind's your friend or it's your enemy.
Yeah. We have used decoys.
Yep.
2 or 3, like Montana or heads up, we've stuck them in the ground. This is years ago, inside this wind channel down, and we douse those things in cow and heat urine and stuff like that. This was probably 10 years ago. It was Montana decoys, and we set those suckers up, and then we got a guy way up on the hill, kind of off to the side, calling him. We kind of knew how elk would come down this channel and walk up it. And so we made sure our collar was out of the range. And the shooter was a little about 40 yards off where the wind would blow downhill. So it was all blowing downhill, but the elk would come from an angle that they would reach the scent stream of the decoys before they reach the scent stream of the shooter.
Totally.
And they come down and a few times they smelled the elk because they're coming down the hill to get to where you hear the call and it sounds like a big herd. And they would look up, see the decoys, smell it, put their head down and just start walking straight to the decoys. Just straight up. And they'd see the decoy, boom, and keep walking right to it. And we tricked their nose and their eyes.
Yep.
And it was always young elk, cows and young bulls, and it worked great. Actually, it worked pretty effectively, and we got some bulls, but older bulls, we've never pulled that off. And I wonder, when you're using cow and heat and other such scents and stuff, how accurate of a smell is it? How was it derived? And the other part that I often wonder about
is it kind of like our noses when I smell Carmex or something.
Yeah.
It's like it smells like sugar cookies,
right?
And
right.
So,
but to them,
can we fool them?
What is it they're really picking out? And I don't know.
No,
when it comes to urine,
all I've found to be 100% accurate is keep the wind in your favor. And if you keep the wind blowing from the elk to you, he's not going to smell you.
Yeah,
and
I think it's really interesting for new hunters. They'll spend a lot of money on clothing that professes to keep your scent down.
Yep.
Spend a lot of money on products that descent and spray bottles and then cover scents and urines and stuff like that. And in large part, I don't spend money on those products anymore. I do for blacktail hunting.
Yeah, and it's a different game. I think, like you mentioned, it's a different situation. Whitetail hunting, cover scents, rubber boots, the whole thing. If you're trapping coyotes, you've got to wear rubber gloves when you're setting the traps, and there can't be any scent there. When it comes to elk, though, it's just play the wind. Yeah. The wind is your friend unless it's your enemy, so don't let it be your enemy.
Yeah.
So, another one that kind of ties into the thermals, weather, natural type things like the wind, the full moon. And the question of, I only have 1 week. I had to schedule
rubbish.
it. Yeah. Full sun, full moon, just go hunt. And so, if you could pick 1 week to hunt, what would it be, moon phase-wise? And if you were forced to hunt the full moon, how would you change your tactics?
And we don't really pay a lot of attention to it, to be honest, because when there is a full moon and we know there is a full moon and the skies are bright all night, we found that the elk are screaming and they tend to be rutting all night long in a way that they don't when it's darker. But I don't know how much it's really impacted one way or the other. Sure. It seems like sometimes they do rut and bugle all night long. This is all anecdotal, though. I mean, some of the things that we've done, regardless of the moon phase, is if the elk are rutting and they're screaming, then we close the distance in the night and try to get close to where those elk are. Then we'll sleep, a little bit, and then we'll be right on them first thing in the morning. And we'll try to shadow them, stay close to them, keep the currents, the wind blowing in the right direction.
And the reason why is because they've been out all night feeding, rutting, and everything. And instead of bedding down and getting some rest at night, they've been up. So as soon as it gets daylight, they're heading to rest. So you're on them at first light because that window is much
because
smaller.
They're not going to do it during the day when we would, or early in the morning even when we'd like to get on them. So we got to be like right next to them. As the sun is coming up, or they're sleeping all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of that's just getting close and trying to figure out where they go. And one of our favorite strategies is, same as yours, is, we'll hike at night, we'll get close, we'll keep the wind right, we know what it's going to do, we can hear them rutting, and then we try to figure out where they're bedding.
Yep.
And we let them bed. We might shadow them, just glass them. You can hear them as they move away. Okay, they're in this bottom somewhere. We know they're there, and we'll try to get on them then in the afternoon after they've laid down for an hour or two, and they're sleepy and they're tired,
Yeah.
But we kind of wait till we think the bull's kind of getting restless now. He's had a little rest. Now he's amped up. Now his testosterone's raging again.
Yep.
And then we're going to try to get in above him and try to piss him off and call him in the afternoon. That has worked like it's the best time.
There is nothing like hunting a mature elk in his bed near his cows. He's territorial. He's not moving. We've talked about that several times, but I think the thing that
they're tired, man.
Yeah, they don't
they're
want
just like
bothered.
Us. They just don't.
But at the same time, on that full moon, like you said, they've been in bed since 7:30 in the morning, and at 12:30, 1 o'clock, they're restless. Mm-hmm. And if you can get in there on a full moon during the middle of the day, I think that midday madness just gets amplified on a full moon. So
especially those cows, like often it seems like the bull is the one that gets restless.
Right.
The cows are like, we're not moving, dude. We are not moving.
We're totally fine.
So
just
he has
laying here
no
all
choice.
day.
He can't like push them out. They refuse. So he just is like, well, I got to fight.
Yep. I'll take out my anger on this tree and start raking it, and all of a sudden there's a competitor there. And
oh yeah, and that's the other thing is it seems like they just destroy trees all afternoon.
Yeah.
They're just screaming and destroying trees. Like they let one out here and there, and that's their hobby all day while they're waiting for the gals to get back into the mood, you know.
Totally. So yeah, I guess my strategy is.
So you have recognized though, you have put it like that when there is a full moon and they're out all night, that they sleep more during the day.
They go to bed earlier in the morning.
Yeah.
They're heading to the
Your
bedding
window
area.
of hunting time is a lot narrower.
From the first daylight hour until they bed down.
Yeah.
You have a much smaller window there during a full moon, and they're in their bedding area longer throughout the day on a full moon.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the efficiency of hunting that bedding area, I think, is increased quite a bit on a full moon. So I definitely, like you said, if you're stuck hunting the full moon week, don't cancel your vacation. Don't say, I'm not going elk hunting this year. Just recognize you aren't going to be chasing bugles for 4 hours in the morning. You're going to have about 20 or 30 minutes of bugling action.
But that's where, like, we just figure out when they're bugling.
Yeah.
And if it's in the middle of the night, then that's when we make our play.
Yep.
We'll just get in close when they are talking, and then when the sun comes up, we're right there. And that's for us, regardless of whether the moon is out or not. If they're talking at night, it's an opportunity for us to close the distance.
Yep.
Period.
And keep track of
Sometimes
where they are.
they're not talking at night, though. They're just talking right as the sun's coming up, and that's when they're actually getting movement. And I guess, probably because the moon hasn't been out and
dark night, they're going to bed down. They're going to be up feeding all night on and it's a new moon. There's no moon out there.
They can't see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, that full moon conversation, it's a part of a dynamic puzzle. And if that full moon hits right in the middle of the peak rut, it changes the hunt for sure. And, so I guess what I look at, the fall equinox, that's the day where the daylight hours are equal to the nighttime hours.
Yep.
And they've shown that the Estrus cycle of a cow elk is triggered by that fall equinox, and it usually falls within 5 to 7 days of the fall equinox. And so this year, I think the fall equinox is on September 22nd in 2016. So that means that the rut's probably going to start somewhere around the 15th to the 29th of September. And that's a pretty wide range there. The thing that I don't like about that is the full moon this year falls on September 16th. And so if you're hunting, I like to hunt the front part of the fall equinox. I like to hunt the pre-rut right before they're actually breeding. And so that would put me, I would want to hunt from the 10th to the 18th time frame based on the fall equinox. But in that, the full moon hits on the 16th. That complicates things a little bit. If the full moon hits on Labor Day weekend and it's the 3rd, 4th, 5th of September, that puts me with a new moon or no moon around the 19th of September, which also aligns with the perfect timing of the fall equinox. And so I think there are pieces of that puzzle that you can recognize and say, if a year lines up that the full moon lands on Labor Day weekend and I can hunt from the 10th to the 18th on a new moon or a waning moon, man, that's going to be magic that week. You just have to realize that if you can't, you have to adjust a little bit. Yeah, they're going to be out later at night. While they're crazy bugling during the peak rut, they're going to be out all night getting that done. So the daytime's not going to be quite the same.
I heard Mark Kenyon on the Wired to Hunt podcast talk about this as far as whitetail behavior goes. Mm-hmm. And they had some biologists that have, tagged deer and tracked them and monitored behaviors and local herds and kind of see when they're coming and going and actually have like documented evidence of how much they move.
Right.
Versus depending on the moon phase.
Yeah.
And they kind of found no correlation. The behavior didn't change much.
Yeah.
And so, but yet there are a lot of whitetail hunters that firmly believe that there is a correlation. Yep. And so he was like, well, they're just, based on our limited evidence, we're not seeing that. And I wondered, does this apply to elk, though? Because in my mind, from what I can tell,
I've formulated a hypothesis that's very
elk
clear.
Rut like crazy during a full moon all night long.
Yep.
And then they disappear during the day. And that I have found to be true.
And I don't think their movements necessarily change. They're still going from their bedding area to their feeding area. I just think the time that they move changes. And then, how vocal they are at different parts of the day.
I just know that I also move around better during a full moon at night. And so it's a good time to, if it's bright as day, because you got a great full moon,
totally
put that pack on and get close to wherever you can hear some elk.
Yep.
Know the area well enough to know the wind and stay out of that pattern, but get close and see what they do.
Definitely.
And when the sun comes up, be in position to capitalize. It's too many guys, I think, they get up and they start hiking, and it's like, look, your 20 minutes of elk opportunity, you were not in position. You need to be in position for 2 hours ago.
Totally.
And often on days like that, in places like that, we'll catch our sleep during the day when the elk are sleeping. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you just gotta play it by what the elk are doing.
If they're laying a lot, if they're getting to bed early and they're laying down a lot all day, usually they just can't help but get up early in the evening to get to rutting and feeding.
Yeah.
And so that's a good time to catch them, because they've had enough.
Totally.
And so they're not going to wait until dark or they're going to get up a little bit earlier in the evening and start moving, and you have a play then as well.
And there's all of those different challenges that play into elk hunting compound each other. If you have a full moon that hits at the same time as the fall equinox, that hits at the same time as a hot dry week, that hits all of these different things that hits the same time, a pack of wolves moves into the area, it's going to be tough, know. And so you just recognizing those things, trying to minimize as much of it as you can, and then, control what you can control and make the best of it.
But I do think you can capitalize on a lot of those events that take place that try to screw you up. You can find ways.
The elk are still there.
Yeah. You talked about that other hunter coming in. We hunted Oregon, where public land, and there's a lot of hunter pressure out there. It's the Orange Army during rifle, and during bow, there's just lots of guys out there. We have used other hunters to kill elk all the time. They're coming in from above. We know they're going to spook through this canyon. We're going to be here when they come through, and then we're going to do a few cow calls to get the bull to And often when bulls get separated from the cows, we've seen, at least where we grew up, the cows would go, that bull would let them get 200, 300, 400 yards out in front of him, and he'll just smell them, and he'll just follow them.
Yep.
So we know they went through this little saddle. We'll sit there for 4, 5, 6, 8 hours waiting for that bull, and so often that bull has come trailing hours later,
on the same path.
Yeah. And so we're, anytime we can get between a bull and his cows, and we think that we know the terrain, we know where he's going to come through and follow him, we'll sit and wait. In fact, I did that once, and got a shot at my first cougar, and I shot my first giant bull in the antlers. It was an awesome hunt.
Excellent.
That's another story.
And you brought up maybe a final question for us to wrap up this podcast on, but public land. I hunt public land, and it's tough. It adds an element. There's not a right way or a wrong way. There's nothing wrong with private land by any means. But I did get a handful of questions in this survey regarding public land, and especially for someone back east or down in the south, maybe where there's not as much public land, and it's overwhelming to come out here and recognize that such high percentages are. A couple of questions we got. Number one, what can we do as sportsmen to secure private land or public land and make sure that we have access, because they recognize in areas where there are elk and private land, there's not access to hunt openly. You have to pay for that access. And so for, a non-resident, an out-of-stater, sportsmen in general, what groups or how can we be involved to support public land? And I think, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is the pinnacle conservation group for elk and elk habitat. And so I think being a member there for $35 is a good way to put your money where your mouth is. $35 is nothing to say, I want to be a part of this.
Yep.
But another one that I've been aware of here lately is Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and what they're doing just to help make people aware of some of the legislature and politics that are going into dissolving some of our public lands. And I think it's a real important thing that if we don't get active and involved now, it's very real to imagine a lot of that access disappearing very quickly.
Yeah, Ty and I just had this conversation. We haven't published the podcast yet. Ty Stubblefield, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We just went over this. I posted a post on Facebook that was a little controversial about that as well. And, it's very real that our public lands could become privatized within the next 100 years.
Oh, or even much sooner.
And, you can look at other states in the nation. One of those is Texas.
Yeah, 2% public land.
And 1% huntable.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that, that's 1% open to hunting, public land open to hunting. That's sad, really.
Because you have to pay for access at that point. Hunting becomes a pay-to-play sport.
It's a private thing.
Yeah.
This land belongs to individuals. It's privatized. Now, when you think of public lands in general on the large scale, those are we all own those. If you're a citizen of the United States, that land is yours.
Yep.
You have a right to it. It's shared by the whole nation.
Yep.
If you sell it, it benefits the few, not the whole nation anymore.
Yep.
And so this model that we have in America is pretty dang unique to have those kind of lands out west, just vast tracts of wilderness that are owned by the whole nation.
And completely accessible at any time by anyone for the most part.
Right. And so I feel strongly that it's so important that we maintain those public lands, because we talked about this before. Loss of access means people stop hunting.
Totally.
Period.
Yep.
If you have access to land that you can hunt and the entry fees are low or non-existent, then if you have access to all this property, then we have a lot of hunters that are here to support the hunting industry. And more than that, I don't care about, as much as I love hunting and I want to hunt, I care most about the animals themselves. I care most about the wild places. So if I had to give up hunting, if I gave up hunting, or if I thought hunting, if hunting was no longer in existence, but it ensured massive quantities of wildlife and wild places,
and our access to be able to still
see
be a
them,
part of it,
I would be okay with that.
Yeah.
But I firmly believe they're linked. I think people lose touch with why animals matter when they stop hunting them.
Yep.
And we can debate that all day long, but the people that hunt, they put their dollars toward habitat and wildlife. People who
they're the
don't
number
hunt,
one contributor to
number one by
not even a close.
There's not even another close group.
Yep.
So when you look at that, if you look at that, there's some connection to using the land and hunting it that gives you a passion to give back to it. If you take away the people that are using it, will that connection to give back to it fade as well? I firmly believe it will, because that's what we see today. They talk about it, though, these other groups. They talk about how much they care about animals and how much they're going to give and how much they're helping the habitat. But it doesn't actually
all
turn
they care about is taking away what we do. Hunting is the true model of conservation. It is, because we want to make sure that it's here for the next generation. We want our children to enjoy the same things we did, the same experiences. Yes, we kill animals. We have a tag, we have a weapon, we fill our freezers, but we also think about next season and next generation and making sure that's passed on.
You're good friends with Randy Newberg.
Absolutely.
And Randy Newberg is pretty much, to me, the kind of the expert guy on all this stuff. And I've told people in this podcast I just did with Ty, and I'll mention it again here, that Randy Newberg, episode 10, he talks about the transfer of federally managed public lands to state ownership, to state managed public land, which is a push right now that's going on. Yeah. And he breaks it down, episode 10, and basically there's other sources as well, but the bottom line is moving federally managed land into state managed control is just an elaborate process in privatizing public land.
States don't have the budget to manage the lands. Yeah. They don't have that budget, and so the first thing they're going to do when they have to trim their budget is sell off that land. That's a sinkhole for them.
I compare it to when you get a house that is too big for you to pay for. You inherit it because your aunt gives it to you.
Yeah, but you can't afford the taxes on it.
You can't afford it. So what happens is it's bleeding you dry. You have no money for food, gas, groceries, people, collections is after you. You're like, you. So what happens? You sell it. It was a great house. You loved it. You would have kept it if you could afford it, but you can't. Yeah. The track record for states, there's hundreds of years of that. They have shown that they can't afford it. The people who are trying to get it moved into state control, they know that it's just a matter of time before the state is bled dry. Yep. They don't have the finances and the ability to hold it, and they sell it off. And that's been Nevada's a perfect example. They had nearly 3 million acres of public land. They've sold all but 3,000 of it. Yep. So other states have had a little better track record, but they all have public land for sale. And this whole Utah thing, it's interesting where they say, once it transfers to state ownership, this land will stay public. We will not sell it. Meanwhile, they have tons of state land up for auction on their website. It's
and
like
a whole list of bidders that are there before they even have ownership of the land saying, hey, if this goes through, I'm willing, let me know.
Those
I'll buy
Utah
it from you.
group, they're just crooked dudes, man. Crooked dudes, I'm going to call it.
There's good people in Utah. We spent the weekend with a couple of them. But
I'm just saying, there's some politicians that are like
out for themselves.
Yes. So it's just an issue I hope that everyone listens to. Check out Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We talk about
it's $25 for a year membership there, and it just helps support the fight. And
you've known Ty Stubblefield for a long time.
Yeah.
Can you picture Ty working for an organization that's a green decoy?
Not if he knows anything about it.
Can you picture him working for an organization that actually is anti-hunting?
No.
It's just ridiculous. And yet there's a lot of propaganda and media out there trying to portray Backcountry Hunters and Anglers as that type of organization. It's just bought and paid for slander by these groups that are trying to steal public lands.
And it's hard. You have to keep things a little separated because when we look at big government, yes, we don't want the federal government telling each state what to do. That each state should govern itself, and so I think for a lot of people, the natural thing is, well, the state should be in control of the land. Then and at first glance, that sounds really good. It really does,
especially to that conservative voter who's like, the government should not have too much control.
Yeah, I don't want them telling me what to do with my land. This Idaho National Forest is my public land, and our state. I think Idaho does a pretty good job of just maintaining traditional values.
Yep.
And so at first glance, you'd think, they're going to do a good job and take care of our land. And it's not that they wouldn't, it's that they can't. They can't afford to do that, and they don't have an option to go back to the federal government and say, will you take it back and manage it for us? They go to the next private corporation who comes in, locks it down, does whatever they want with it. And now
they can have all the best intentions in the world, but they just can't tax the citizens of Idaho enough money to pay for it.
Yep.
This land that's in Idaho, that's public and federally managed, it belongs to the entire U.S. We all get taxed to manage that land, including the great state of New York,
99% of
the great
Texas
state,
that's private.
All those other places help pay for the management of these lands, not just the few people that live in Idaho.
Totally.
And so when you take all those costs, costs of fire, costs of management for that land, you just you're putting an albatross around the state's neck, and eventually and they can't keep it, they'll sell it.
Yep.
And so, yeah, at first glance, it seems like a good idea, but when you dig a little deeper, you realize that it's really an elaborate process to trick hunters and especially us conservative folks into giving away our public lands.
Yeah, and the big landowners right now are all for it. They're proponents of transfer it to the state, please, because
they're paying the money.
They've got
to
their
get,
checkbook out waiting for the transfer to happen.
And that should raise some red flags for who's funding this. And you look into it and you're like, okay, rich landowners who would like to have the land. And I think one thing to keep in mind is when it comes to the federal government having too much control, okay, when it comes to public lands, the idea that taking the land away from them gives the states more control, I'm not sure that there's a correlation there.
Yeah.
And we have state representatives here, and Ty makes this point. We have state representatives here in Idaho, in Oregon, in Washington, who are players at the table. They get to go on the federal level. And you work with those people to influence how things work. The problem is, and Ty mentions this, that so many hunters just aren't coming to the table.
Yeah.
So we're spending a lot of time saying, gosh, if we put it into state control, it'll fix everything. When the reality is we have a process today that works. We just don't play.
We aren't involved in the process.
And that's where backcountry hunters and anglers can really make a difference.
Yep.
They are a consolidated group of hunters like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, like the NRA. When you get these groups and you get a large membership, we can move as one and have a stronger impact.
And it's not like we pay $25 to and let them go do all the dirty work, but as a member, they're going to be informing us of, hey, these things are happening.
Journals that we get in the mail.
Here's who you need to contact. Here's how you can support this. And
absolutely, you can get involved. So, important issue. Probably beat it like a dead horse, but I'm telling you, there's just a lot of confusion out there. And on the surface, you go to ALC's website and you go to some of these other ones, and you're like, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense to move this into state hands. And then you dig a little deeper, and that's not the case. Yeah. Another issue and another podcast I highly recommend that people go and listen to is Randy Newberg, episode 17, and he talks about the Endangered Species Act and litigation and how our current system for suing and managing these endangered species issues is really, that's the financial burden that's making it very difficult for us to get anything done.
Totally. Control by the states is hard because the states don't have the money to manage grizzly bears or wolves.
And they can't win in these courts because it's kind of a racket. It's basically a suing over the Endangered Species Act has become a career.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And it's just a way to collect money from taxpayers over, and it doesn't really matter if you believe in the issues or not. Just litigating, period, is a job.
Yeah. And
so until we fix some of that, I think we're, often let's transfer the ownership. That'll fix it. No, that issue will stay in place, and the state will still get sued. The Endangered Species Act, the states are subject to those are the same. We got to fix the problem, which is the laws that enable that behavior.
Absolutely.
So, and just more. We kind of went off on that tangent. You can't get me going down that road.
It's good stuff. No, we got through 4 questions this time. So we've in 2 podcasts have touched on 5 of the 100 questions.
Yes.
So we've got 20 more podcasts to go to get them all here.
Well, Corey, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you for coming to Boise and hanging out with me for the weekend.
I'm excited about your project. Hashtag Project Success.
Yep. So we're working on hashtag Project Success. Just go to elk101.com. In fact, this weekend,
kind of top secret, some of it.
Well, I'll just say that if you are on our email list, in fact, let's do this. You've got some really cool new apparel, new shirts, new hats. We'll give away a couple Gritty Bowman shirts and hats to, say, for the next 7 days after this podcast airs. Just go to elk101.com, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, enter your name and your email address, sign up for our email list. We aren't going to spam you. We're only going to send you information about elk hunting. So if you're not interested in elk hunting, neglect this unless you just really want a shirt from the Gritty Bowman. But if you have any interest in elk hunting, whether it's educational, informational, entertainment, anything, sign up for our email list and we'll keep you getting ready for September all throughout the year.
It's a great newsletter. It really is. I highly encourage people. We'll give away a couple shirts and hats.
Yeah. So just sign up for the email list. I'll pick for the next 7 days. I'll randomly pick a couple people that sign up during that time. So new sign-ups, and we'll get them shirt and hat.
Sweet. All right, Corey. Thanks again. We'll have to do some more of these over Skype.
Definitely.
Next time. Got a lot more questions, and appreciate everything. Stay gritty. Okay, gritty friends. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. If you did, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes, Podbean, or Stitcher. We love reading your reviews. And connect with us on social media if you're on there. Look us up on Facebook and Instagram, and take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can receive notifications when we upload new videos. We've got a sweet deal with Mountain Ops. You get 20% off on all Mountain Ops supplements, combo packs, and apparel when you type in the word gritty at checkout. If you're a hardcore elk hunter, or you want to be, go to the Elk 101 website online and check them out. Our friend Corey Jacobsen is killing it with some of the best elk hunting information and entertainment on the web. If you haven't heard, we're doing a huge gear giveaway to try and grow and expand the gritty community on Facebook and Instagram. I asked a bunch of friends to pitch in on this gear giveaway, and they all came through with some awesome stuff. Our friends at Kifaru, Rockslide, First Light, Phelps Game Calls, One Shot Gear, Mountain Ops, Triple X Archery, Blacktail Outdoors, and Is It September Yet are pitching in some sweet gear for the giveaway. We'll announce all the details in the next few weeks. All you have to do to be entered to win is like our Gritty Bowman Facebook page and follow us on Instagram. All right, friends, let me leave you with one other quote from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "It behooves every man to remember that the work of the critic is of altogether secondary importance, and that, in the end, progress is accomplished by the man who does things." We all have a choice. We can be people who do things or people who criticize the work of others. It's pretty simple, really. Get out there and do your thing. Good luck on your hunts, and stay gritty.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.